Hey guys, tonight, we're drifting down the sun-splashed banks of the Nile, where papyrus sways in the breeze and ibis birds strut like they own the place. It's early morning about 4,000 years ago, and the smell of wet earth mixes with something else, a warm, slightly sour scent wafting from clay jars. You squint in the golden haze of dawn and realize you're about to drink beer. For breakfast? That's right. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where your first meal of the day involves a frothy, porridge-like beer brewed just hours ago and served up with a side of flat bread. It's hearty, it's bubbly, and it's probably got a few bits of grain still floating around. You probably won't survive this, by the way, not because of the beer itself, but because it's served in a ceramic pot that hasn't seen a sponge since the reign of Khufu. And let's be real, your delicate 21st century intestines weren't built for this kind of microbial party. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle out from your mud brick home just as the sky begins to soften from black to dusty lavender. The Nile is breathing fog. Birds caw lazily overhead, and your neighbors are already up some hauling reeds, some whispering thanks to the river gods for another day of water, and one guy across the way already elbow deep in a barrel of doughy mash that will become beer by noon. Your job today, whatever your overseer says it is: quarrying stone check, hauling sand double check, chanting alongside your fellow workers so the giant blocks you're hauling don't crush your spirits or your bones, triple check. But first you need your rations, a loaf of sour bread and a jug of beer. Not your hipster small batch IPA, no. This is chunky opaque and borderline spoonable. It's been fermented just long enough to blur the edges of reality, but not so long it becomes vinegar. You sip it. It's dense, like barley oatmeal had a baby with kombucha and then gave up halfway through the flavor profile. This isn't just a snack, though. It's calories, it's hydration, it's life, and it's standard issue. Whether you're chiseling limestone for Pharaoh's latest tomb or weaving baskets for temple offerings, beer is breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner, too. Historians still argue whether this daily ration made workers drunk or just happily sluggish, but the records are clear: Egypt's massive state projects didn't run on caffeine, they ran on beer. The sun climbs higher, turning the river to molten gold. You squint, wipe your brow, and feel the grainy residue from your last sip settle between your teeth like a souvenir. Still, it beats eating raw onions for breakfast again. You stretch, yawn, and set off for the quarry, your clay jug swinging from one hand, your dignity trailing somewhere behind. As you walk, you pass children splashing in the shallows, elderly women grinding wheat with rhythmic determination, and a goat that may or may not have stolen someone's laundry. Life here is gritty, sweaty, and coated in a fine mist of Nile dust. But it hums with purpose. You take another swig. Is that date pulp, possibly? Did someone toss in a handful of herbs for good measure? Probably. Beer here isn't brewed in stainless steel tanks with digital thermometers. It's cooked in open pits, cooled in clay jugs, and flavored with whatever's lying around. Which means every jug is a surprise. And today's tastes faintly like mint and regret. You reach the worksite just as your crew begins the morning chants. The foreman is waving a staff, not because it helps anything, but because it makes him feel important. You join the line-hefting rope and rock and let the rhythm of feet, rope, and shouting lull you into a trance. Your beer jug sits nearby, nestled in the shade of a half-finished wall. You'll sip it again at mid-morning once the sun is truly unbearable and the air smells like roasted limestone. By then it'll be warm, flat, and still better than any other option. You might be building monuments for kings, but deep down what keeps you going is this chunky, fermented, slightly sandy drink that has more in common with soup than celebration. And somehow, that's just fine. By the time the sun blazes directly overhead, you've hauled a few thousand pounds of rock, sung through your third round of labor chants, and officially reached the point of being covered in a fine paste of sweat dust and optimism. The Nile glimmers in the distance, mocking you with its cool curves, while your arms feel like they've been borrowed from a granite statue and cursed to wobble slightly. It's break time. You trudge toward the shaded rest area, though shade might be a generous word for a single scrap of woven palm mat propped on sticks and collapse beside your clay jug. The beer has warmed to the temperature of bath water, and the top is forming a suspicious skin. But you don't hesitate. You pick it up and drink deeply. And here's the thing, it hits just right. That sour, grainy, vaguely fruity taste, it settles in your stomach like a hug from a very fermented grandmother. You can feel your energy start to creep back up your muscles, unclenching just a little. It's not just hydration, it's morale. Your buddy Haru, sitting next to you and nursing his own jug, leans over and mutters, "Not as good as yesterday's." You nod solemnly. Yesterday's batch had figs. This one tastes like someone left it too close to the fish market. Still, it's fuel. And in Egypt, where the sun can melt your resolve faster than it melts your sandals, fuel is everything. Now, before we glamorize it too much, this isn't some artisanal experience. The ancient Egyptians didn't have brewmasters in plaid tunics selecting barley strains. This was beer for the masses. Made in bulk, consumed in bulk, and occasionally shared with the gods during festival days, although one suspects even the deities passed on the chunkier batches. What you're drinking now, it's called henket, brewed by soaking partially baked bread in water, fermenting it with wild yeast, then straining it through reeds or cloth, or not straining it. Depending on the mood of whoever was brewing at 4 a.m. Historians still argue whether henket counted as food drink or a philosophical gray zone of soggy calories. But when you're halfway through a 10-hour shift building something the pharaoh won't even live to see finished, you don't ask questions, you just drink. Around you, the worksite buzzes with similar rituals. Men passing clay pots, women fanning fires beneath baking kilns, children darting between reed baskets and limestone chunks like feral cats. Everyone has a jug. Some plain, some painted, all slightly chipped and full of the breakfast of champions. The elites had fancier versions, of course, clearer, spicier, sometimes even perfumed. Rumor has it the high priests had a beer so fine it sparkled when poured. But down here in the trenches, your beer sparkles mostly because there's probably a beetle floating in it. You flick it out, shrug, and keep drinking. You glance at your jug again and note how it's decorated with a symbol for protection, perhaps an eye of Horus, or a tiny figure of Bes, the squat, lion-faced god who protects households and parties alike. A good omen. Or at the very least a reminder that you haven't cracked your jug this week, which in itself is a small miracle. Nearby, a group of scribes pass by, sandals, clean robes, crisp, not a drop of beer in sight. They're probably heading to document today's progress, or perhaps critique it from a safe distance. You don't envy them. They might not be lifting stones, but they're certainly not getting a midday buzz either. Beer in ancient Egypt wasn't just sustenance, it was culture. Babies were weaned onto it. Brides received it as part of dowries. Workers were paid in it. Gods were offered it. It was both sacred and profane, the daily bread and the divine toast. You finish your jug, or most of it some sediment is better left to the gods, and wipe your mouth with the back of your dusty hand. There's a brief moment of calm as the wind picks up carrying the scent of tamarisk and the distant laughter of a vendor hawking honey cakes. You know what comes next. Back to hauling, back to singing, back to making something immortal with the patience of a drunk stonemason and the endurance of a barefoot demigod. You rise slowly, joints protesting like disgruntled papyrus scribes, and head back to the line. Your empty jug swings from your belt, a little lighter, now a little warmer inside. You're fueled by barley and ambition, and a possibly medicinal level of ancient beer. But that's the Egyptian way. By the time the sun blazes directly overhead, you've hauled a few thousand pounds of rock sung through your third round of labor chants, and officially reached the point of being covered in a fine paste of sweat dust and optimism. The Nile glimmers in the distance, mocking you with its cool curves, while your arms feel like they've been borrowed from a granite statue and cursed to wobble slightly. It's break time. You trudge toward the shaded rest area. Though shade might be a generous word for a single scrap of woven palm mat propped on sticks and collapse beside your clay jug. The beer has warmed to the temperature of bathwater, and the top is forming a suspicious skin. But you don't hesitate. You pick it up and drink deeply. And here's the thing, it hits just right. That sour, grainy, vaguely fruity taste. It settles in your stomach like a hug from a very fermented grandmother. You can feel your energy start to creep back up your muscles, unclenching just a little. It's not just hydration, it's morale. Your buddy Haru, sitting next to you and nursing his own jug, leans over and mutters, "Not as good as yesterday's." You nod solemnly. Yesterday's batch had figs. This one tastes like someone left it too close to the fish market. Still, it's fuel. And in Egypt, where the sun can melt your resolve faster than it melts your sandals, fuel is everything. Now, before we glamorize it too much, this isn't some artisanal experience. The ancient Egyptians didn't have brewmasters in plaid tunics selecting barley strains. This was beer for the masses. Made in bulk, consumed in bulk, and occasionally shared with the gods during festival days. Although one suspects even the deities passed on the chunkier batches. What you're drinking now, it's called henket, brewed by soaking partially baked bread in water, fermenting it with wild yeast, then straining it through reeds or cloth, or not straining it, depending on the mood of whoever was brewing at 4 a.m. Historians still argue whether henket counted as food drink or a philosophical gray zone of soggy calories. But when you're halfway through a 10-hour shift building something the pharaoh won't even live to see finished, you don't ask questions. You just drink. Around you, the worksite buzzes with similar rituals. Men passing clay pots, women fanning fires beneath baking kilns, children darting between reed baskets and limestone chunks like feral cats. Everyone has a jug. Some plain, some painted, all slightly chipped and full of the breakfast of champions. The elites had fancier versions, of course, clearer, spicier, sometimes even perfumed. Rumor has it the high priests had a beer so fine it sparkled when poured. But down here in the trenches, your beer sparkles, mostly because there's probably a beetle floating in it. You flick it out, shrug, and keep drinking. You glance at your jug again and note how it's decorated with a symbol for protection. Perhaps an eye of Horus, or a tiny figure of Bes, the squat, lion-faced god, who protects households and parties alike. A good omen. Or at the very least a reminder that you haven't cracked your jug this week, which in itself is a small miracle. Nearby, a group of scribes pass by, sandals, clean robes, crisp, not a drop of beer in sight. They're probably heading to document today's progress, or perhaps critique it from a safe distance. You don't envy them. They might not be lifting stones, but they're certainly not getting a midday buzz either. Beer in ancient Egypt wasn't just sustenance, it was culture. Babies were weaned onto it. Brides received it as part of dowries. Workers were paid in it. Gods were offered it. It was both sacred and profane, the daily bread and the divine toast. You finish your jug, or most of it, some sediment is better left to the gods, and wipe your mouth with the back of your dusty hand. There's a brief moment of calm as the wind picks up, carrying the scent of tamarisk and the distant laughter of a vendor hawking honey cakes. You know what comes next. Back to hauling, back to singing, back to making something immortal with the patience of a drunk stonemason and the endurance of a barefoot demigod. You rise slowly, joints protesting like disgruntled papyrus scribes, and head back to the line. Your empty jug swings from your belt a little lighter, now a little warmer inside. You're fueled by barley and ambition, and a possibly medicinal level of ancient beer. But that's the Egyptian way. You shuffle toward the break station, if that's what you can call a line of shady palm fronds lashed together over a couple of jugs and a barrel with a questionable lid. It's not luxurious, but it's sacred ground. Because here, dear friend, is where the beer lives. A matronly figure guards the stash. She's barefoot, broad-shouldered, and has the unmistakable energy of someone who's seen every excuse under the sun. She doesn't serve you beer as much as she allows it one gourd ladle at a time. You nod in respect. She squints back, and your gourd is filled with that familiar thick amber murk. It's warm, it's grainy, it's got the consistency of a rice pudding that forgot what it was, but it's yours. You take a sip. Tangy, a hint of date. And something else, maybe coriander, or maybe it's just whatever the ladle touched last week. You don't ask questions. That first gulp hits the sweet spot between satisfaction and minor fermentation regret. The next few go down easier, and soon the sluggish heat of the sun on your back seems less oppressive. The buzzing of flies less aggressive, the future a little more forgiving. You lean back against a sun-warmed rock and watch as a younger worker drops his gourd, spilling half his beer onto the sand. A collective groan rises from the group. Beer spills are tragic, almost sacred. He apologizes with the solemnity of someone who just stepped on a temple cat. You chuckle. It's nice, isn't it? This moment, the hush between haulings. The silence broken only by the occasional burp or distant donkey honk. The gods can have their pyramids. This is where the real holiness lives, in sweat, in laughter, in the warm press of clay cups against tired lips. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian beer was intentionally low in alcohol to keep workers focused, or whether everyone was just buzzed out of their gourd 70% of the time. The truth is likely somewhere in between, but there's no doubt beer made the unbearable bearable, and sometimes even fun. You look at your hands, cracked, calloused, coated in fine limestone dust. They don't look like much, but they've done things. They've lifted, pushed, carved, held. They've tipped cups in celebration, clenched fists in frustration, and now they cradle a half-empty gourd with the reverence of a philosopher. Funny, isn't it? How civilizations build themselves on the backs of laborers and the bottoms of beer jars. You'd think more people would talk about it. But no one writes epic poems about mid-morning breaks and barley sediment. No statues for the gourd bearers. Still, you remember. That's something. Someone taps your shoulder, Clarion, the guy with the lopsided sandals. He offers a date cake. You accept, of course. The combo of soft sweetness and malty beer sludge is peak luxury. 5-star dining worksite edition. Clarion grins, a bit of date stuck in his teeth. There's a breeze now, not enough to cool you off entirely, but enough to lift your hair and carry the smell of river and grain and old stone through the air. For a moment, you let yourself believe you're not covered in dust, not exhausted, not thinking about how many more blocks still need hauling. You're just present. And then a horn sounds, not a trumpet, more of a hollow reed bleat, low and flat. Time to move. You rise, groan. Stretch. Return your gourd to the matron. She inspects it like she's expecting a crack you didn't know you caused. Then it's back toward the ramps, back toward the sun, back toward your ancient architectural destiny. One foot in front of the other, you think. You've done it before. You'll do it again. And somewhere between your second date cake and the realization that your belt is now mysteriously damp, you remember an old joke. Why did the pyramid builder refuse a second beer? Because he already felt Pharaoh Noff. You groan aloud. Clarion laughs. Beer jokes. The oldest kind. You climb the ramp with the slow, rhythmic persistence of someone who's forgotten what their legs felt like before they were made of stone. Not literal stone, of course, but it's getting close. The midday sun is molten, dripping over your shoulders, pooling at the base of your spine. Your tunic clings like it's plotting against you. And your hands, well, they've now taken on that special clay-colored tint that says, I am one with the quarry. At least your stomach's full of beer. Breakfast of champions, right? The block you're helping guide up the ramp is one of the smaller ones today. Only a few 100 pounds. Just a baby pyramid block. A little limestone cupcake. You and 4 others coordinate like a sleep-deprived ballet troupe, dragging, lifting, adjusting, mumbling curses that haven't changed in 3,000 years. There's rhythm to it all. You grunt, pull, squint step. A voice calls out measurements. Someone hums an off-key melody about crocodiles and taxes. You imagine your liver quietly filing a complaint about what just happened at the beer station. Still it works. The block moves. The pyramid grows. You sweat into the sands of history, and the sands obligingly don't care. Pause. Backtrack. Let's talk about beer again, because really it's the thread holding this whole pyramid-shaped tapestry together. Ancient Egyptian beer wasn't brewed like the crisp lagers you might sip on a lazy modern evening. No, this was different. First they'd bake loaves of a very special emmer bread, crumbly, yeasty, more sponge than slice. Then they'd soak these loaves in water and mash them up, letting wild yeasts do their fizzy magic. Sometimes they added dates, sometimes honey, sometimes herbs. Always with intention, though not always with consistency. The result? A thick, porridge-like brew, full of floating solids fermenting merrily in ceramic vats and ladled out in generous scoops. You drank it because it filled your belly. You drank it because it was safe when water wasn't. You drank it because, let's be honest, you had very few better options. And you drank it in the morning, with gusto. Historians still argue whether beer in Egypt functioned more as food or beverage. Some even call it liquid bread. You prefer breakfast smoothie with bite. By the time the block reaches its resting place, your muscles are humming that special tune they save for hard-won victories and minor back injuries. You lean against it warm, rough, newly placed. For a moment, it feels like you've tucked a puzzle piece into eternity. A foreman passes by, inspecting the alignment with the squint of a man who thinks geometry is a divine calling. He grunts. Approval, disgust. It's unclear, but he doesn't shout. So you take the win. Then someone behind you stumbles and there's a thud, a puff of sand, and a string of ancient profanities that mostly involve jackals. You don't turn. You've been that guy. Everyone has. The important thing is no blood, no broken bones, and the block's still in place. You step away. Slowly. Like your legs are auditioning for a tragic role in a mud brick drama. And somewhere echoing faintly from a few ramps below, you hear it, the unmistakable gurgle of another beer gourd being poured, like a siren song. Clarion appears beside you again, lugging 2 gourd cups, and wearing a look that says, "Don't ask where I got these." You don't. You accept the offering and sip. This batch is cooler. More tang than funk. Possibly a bit more herbs. You're convinced it's the coriander again, though Clarion insists it's anise. Neither of you has ever seen anise. But you've both heard it tastes like ambition and regret. You settle onto a low step carved from the pyramid's side, watching as more blocks crawl upward like determined stone turtles. You wonder idly if anyone centuries from now will know your name. Probably not. But maybe they'll study the beer. Those clay jars, that sticky residue, the bread loaf method, the odd choice of herbs. Maybe someone will raise an eyebrow and say, they drank this in the morning, and maybe they'll smile. You do. Because as strange as it is to base a breakfast around fermentation, it works. It fills the gaps. It numbs the aches. It fuels the building of God's tombs and bureaucrats' obelisks alike. You drink, you stand, you trudge onward. The pyramid isn't going to finish itself. The sun is beginning to lean westward now, casting long, exaggerated shadows across the pyramid's growing flanks. You squint into the light, momentarily distracted by the shimmer of heat off the limestone. Everything has a golden tint, like someone spilled honey across the desert and called it art. You are sticky. You are sunburned. You are extremely full of beer. And yet you feel oddly productive. Let's take a moment, shall we, to talk about the logistics of beer distribution in ancient Egypt. Because you didn't just wander into a pyramid site and help yourself to a pint like it's the corner pub. No, this was a system. A brewery-to-worksite supply chain so efficient that even modern companies might blush. You see, the state, meaning the divine machinery powered by the pharaoh's will, controlled the beer supply. Large brewing operations were typically attached to temples or royal estates. Grain would be collected often as tax. Yes, your tax return was basically paid in barley. That barley would then be turned into emmer bread, and that bread would become your daily beer, which, fun fact, was often meted out as wages. You were literally paid in beer, sometimes also onions. And bread, a three-part pyramid scheme of sustenance. Now picture it, ceramic vats lined up like loyal foot soldiers. A brewer, perhaps, with arms dusted in flour leaning over to stir the bubbling bready mash. Nearby, a worker ladling off a portion into a gourd or small clay jug, then marking a tablet to log the transaction. The ancient equivalent of clocking in. You'd approach, hold out your hands, or your cup, receive your allotment, and proceed to the day's back-breaking tasks with the comfort of knowing your breakfast had the consistency of soup and the nutritional value of an entire sandwich. Historians still argue whether this beer-based payment system empowered workers or simply placated them with mild inebriation. But you know the truth. After 2 gourdfuls, you feel like you could stack blocks to the moon. You lean down, now running your fingers over a freshly smoothed slab. The texture is rough, pitted, but warm. It's not just stone anymore, it's progress. The sort you can see, touch, climb. You feel the satisfaction bloom in your chest like a well-earned burp. Clarion is back. Again. He's got a new beer in hand, one he claims was brewed with tamarind pods. You take a sniff. Sour, tangy, vaguely like a fermented apricot. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Only puked once. Reassuring. You sip anyway. Not bad. A little gritty. Definitely alcoholic. It makes the sun seem friendlier, the rocks less judgmental. You make a mental note to ask the brewer for a trade recipe. Maybe offer your aunt's date paste rolls in exchange. All around you, the hum of productivity is punctuated by laughter, grunts, and the occasional shouted curse from someone dropping a chisel. You feel it in your bones, that strange blend of exhaustion and camaraderie made thicker by yeast and sand. And while you're here glowing in the haze of hops and heat, you think back to the gods. Because if beer was the fuel of laborers, it was also the nectar of the divine. Osiris, god of the afterlife, was closely tied to grain and fertility, both key elements in brewing. Hathor, goddess of joy music, and yes, drunkenness often received offerings of beer. And then there's Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, who nearly destroyed humanity until she was pacified by being tricked into drinking beer dyed red to look like blood. That's right. The original hair of the dog myth might just be ancient Egyptian. There's even record of festivals, most notably the Tek festival, where massive quantities of beer were consumed in ritual celebration. Think of it as a state-sponsored riger, where piety met partying. And yes, people would pass out in the temples. Devotion comes in many forms. You look down at your empty gourd, now sticky with residue and sand. You shake the last drops into your mouth, wondering if this counts as a sacred offering. The answer is probably not. But the gods are likely used to half-hearted gestures from half-sober mortals. You raise the gourd toward the setting sun anyway, just in case. As shadows stretch and workers begin to shuffle toward the main camp, the beer line grows again. You see familiar faces, sun-reddened, dust-streaked, beer-glazed. Someone plays a tune on a reed pipe. Someone else sings off-key. It's chaotic, clumsy, and kind of beautiful. You follow the stream of weary bodies toward the evening station, your thoughts drifting with the breeze. Beer has soaked into every layer of this world ritual economy labor legend. You are quite literally fermented into the fabric of civilization. As you wait your turn, Clarion turns to you, his face serious for once. You know, he says, someday people will think we were geniuses. You snort, or drunk. He shrugs. Same thing sometimes. The clay jug is passed your way. You take it. Sip. The stars haven't come out yet, but the sky is fading to violet. Another day down, another jug up. You smile. By now your feet are caked in layers of sunbaked mud. Your tunic smells faintly of sour grain, and you've reached that perfect state of ancient Egyptian satisfaction, slightly buzzed lightly, sunburned, and somehow convinced that the slurred humming from a group of pyramid decorators counts as sacred music. As you saunter back toward the workers' rest quarters, gourd swinging casually from your hand, you pass by the edge of the brewery. Not a grand temple of beer, mind, you just a large open-air space framed by palm poles and faded linen awnings. The smell here is powerful. Yeast smoke, boiled grain, and a mysterious undertone of something vaguely burnt. You pause to peek inside. Inside, women bustle around massive clay vats sunk into the ground. Some are churning thick, porridge-like brews with wooden paddles. Others are scooping liquid into smaller jugs through strained cloth, their hands moving with rhythmic expertise. One woman pauses to swat a fly with what looks like a sprig of papyrus. You instantly respect her. This, you realize, is the true heart of the operation. It's easy to romanticize ancient beer, warm sun, divine rituals, cool jugs clinking. But what you're watching now is the labor that makes all of it possible. Brewing here is both science and survival. These women know their ratios. They can read the bubbles like omens. They taste, sniff, adjust, monitor. And not just for flavor, but for safety. Bad beer can make you sick. Good beer can keep you alive. Great beer. Well, great beer builds pyramids. A young brewer catches your eye and waves you over. She's got a deep teal scarf wrapped around her braids, and the kind of beer-stained fingernails that suggest a hard day's work and zero apologies. Try this, she says, handing you a fresh, frothy ladleful in a squat wooden cup. You sip. It's sharp, a little smoky, slightly sour, hints of date and fig, maybe. It fizzes on your tongue like a gentle warning. You nod. Respectfully, you say this tastes like something that could flatten a priest. She beams. We call it sunhead. You believe her. Historians still argue whether women were the sole brewers in ancient Egypt, or if they simply ran the operations behind the scenes while men got the credit. But from where you're standing, ankle-deep in steam, and surrounded by women shouting measurements over the bubbling chaos, the evidence is leaning toward matriarchal fermentation empire. You watch as another batch is poured into conical clay jars, sealed with reeds and mud. These will be stored possibly for days or weeks in cool cellars or shaded pits. Some might be sent as temple offerings, some handed out at feasts, others loaded onto barges and sent downriver with markings that essentially read property of the god king. Do not chug. You glance back at the brewery's fringe. There, lounging like a cat in the shade, is a scribe with a palm fiber brush tucked behind one ear and a long tablet of wet clay resting in his lap. He's watching the operation, taking notes, probably cataloging the quantities, ingredients, and destinations of each batch. Or maybe he's writing haikus about how sweaty he is. Either way, you envy his job just a little. But then again, you're part of the same ecosystem. The ancient beer supply chain depended on everyone from the barley farmers in the delta to the paddle wielders in the vats, to the laborers like you who drank the stuff like it was life's only certainty. You walk further along the edge of the brewing area, watching how everyone plays their part. Even the discarded grain husks are useful. They're mixed into livestock feed or sometimes dried and burned for fuel. Waste not, want not. You pass a smaller clay basin where a child is helping shape lids for the beer jars. His hands are dusty, his tunic stained, but he hums as he works utterly at ease. There's no child labor law here, just family labor, part of a tradition that stretches back generations and forward to gods know how many more. Eventually, you find a low wall and sit resting the gourd beside you. Your thoughts drift. You think about the role of beer in birth rituals, how women were sometimes given warm, sweet beer during labor. You remember hearing how it was poured over altars during funerals offered to ease souls into the next life. You recall how some hieroglyphs even used a stylized beer jug to represent joy or abundance, or the kind of party that ends with a priest passed out in a reed basket. Beer wasn't just something you drank. It was part of the narrative, part of every story, sacred or stupid. You lean your head back, gazing up at the blue blackening sky. A few stars are beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks in the canvas of heaven. Somewhere to your left, someone burps loud enough to echo against the scaffolding. You feel a surge of affection for all of it. Tomorrow there will be more rocks to haul more sand in your food, more beer in your bloodstream. But for now, there's this warmth in your belly music in the distance, and the distant smell of toasty barley mixing with the scent of river mud and summer air. You smile. Your breath is steady. Your fingers sticky with gourd resin. And for once in this strange, sand-swept corner of time, you feel perfectly brewed. The next morning begins the same way all ancient Egyptian mornings do, with sunlight punching you in the eyelids like a golden fist, and some neighbor shouting at their goat. You groan, roll over, and discover your head is slightly heavier than usual. Not painfully so, just enough that your thoughts feel like they're trying to wade through honey. Breakfast beer, it turns out, is a double-edged sickle. Still, duty calls. And by duty, you mean that another jug of the golden stuff is already waiting beside the fire pit. Lukewarm, slightly flat, but undeniably comforting. You sip carefully. The taste is familiar now, yeasty, earthy, and just a bit sour. It's the liquid equivalent of a damp hug. You munch on a hunk of bread and feel your energy slowly realign. Another glorious day in ancient Egypt fueled by grain and grit. Outside, the compound is already alive with movement. Children chase each other between bundles of reeds. A few workers are loading baskets of supplies onto donkeys. You recognize one man from yesterday's brewery shift. He nods at you with that weary look that says, Yes, I too am powered solely by carbs and spite. You join a small group making their way toward the fields, passing by rows of mud brick houses with palm-thatched roofs. Women sweep stoops with bundled reeds. One pauses to dump a bucket of cloudy water into a nearby trough left over from rinsing barley. Even the wastewater here hums with fermentation. You follow the path east toward the barley fields. Now, this isn't glamorous work, but it's essential. The land here just a few paces from the Nile is dark and soft, rich. Every harvest season, the river overflows its banks and leaves behind a blanket of silt that makes everything grow like a fertility spell gone slightly overboard. You bend to inspect a cluster of barley heads, the stalks golden and swaying gently in the morning breeze. The workers around you are already busy, some cutting with flint sickles, others binding sheaves with papyrus rope. One woman is singing under her breath. The tune is hypnotic, a rise and fall, like the motion of grain in the wind. And you realize this is where it all starts. The beer, the rituals, the soggy breakfasts. All of it begins with these humble little stalks. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians bred barley specifically for beer making or just used whatever they could grow. Some believe there were varieties prized for their fermentation potential: short stalks, plump kernels, minimal husk. Others think beer was just a happy accident of bread dough left too long in the sun. Either way, it works. You help carry a few bundles to the threshing area, where oxen are stomping in lazy circles, loosening the grain from the chaff. It's a process both elegant and slightly chaotic. Hooves clomp straw flies, children dart dangerously close to horns. There's probably a divine metaphor in here, somewhere. Once threshed, the grain is scooped up in baskets and taken to the winnowing mats. Here women stand in pairs, tossing the grain into the air to let the breeze blow away the lighter chaff. It's mesmerizing, this constant, graceful motion, like they're dancing with the wind. You catch a few words of their conversation, something about last night's feast, someone tripping into a date jar, and a wager over who can find the first frog in the barley bundles. Standard agricultural gossip. By mid-morning, you're sweating profusely. Your arms ache. There's grain dust in places you didn't know existed. You pause for a drink from your flask, only to remember it's mostly beer. You shrug and sip. Hydration is hydration. One of the elders beckons you over and hands you a ball of soaked bread mashed with herbs and wild yeast. Starter, she says simply. Ah, yes. The mother of all beer. You take the gooey lump and carry it to the brewery back near the edge of the compound. There you drop it into a pot of warm water and crushed dates, where it will begin the magical transformation from lump to buzz. Tiny bubbles form on the surface, life invisible but unmistakable. You can almost hear it fizzing. Beer is many things here. It's hydration nutrition currency. It's used in medicine, in offerings, in curses and cures. There are even love poems comparing a woman's kiss to the first sip of barley brew, sweet heady, and liable to make you forget where your sandals are. But the heart of it lies in this cycle you're witnessing. Grow, thresh, mash, ferment, drink, repeat. And you are part of it now. You glance up to see the old woman still watching you. She gives a faint nod, then returns to her kneading. That nod says, "You're doing fine. Also, don't forget to stir." You grab a long paddle and begin to mix. The slurry swirls, the scent rising with the steam, earthy, pungent, warm. The stuff of life, if life came with a slightly sour aftertaste. As the sun climbs higher, the entire compound seems to settle into its rhythm. The buzz of insects, the whisper of grain, the quiet symphony of ancient labor. You wipe your brow and smile. The work is hard, but the reward. Oh, the reward is golden and frothy, and waiting just a few hours away. You glance toward the Nile in the distance, its shimmering ribbon cutting through the desert like a divine bookmark. Somewhere out there, more barley grows, more beer bubbles. And someone else is lifting a mug to the morning sky, toasting the absurd, brilliant idea of drinking breakfast. And you ankle-deep in grain husks, and ancient yeast wouldn't have it any other way. By midday, the air has thickened into that unmistakable Egyptian stew of heat dust and the aroma of sweaty linen. Your tunic clings like damp papyrus, and the only breeze comes from a child waving a palm frond, not for your benefit, but to keep flies away from a particularly prized jar of fermenting mash. You consider bribing him, maybe with a fig. But before you can act, you're called back to the brewery courtyard. A new task awaits, transferring the semi-fermented mash into ceramic jars, those iconic two-handled beauties that every respectable kitchen tomb and festival tent seems to own. These aren't just any jars. These are amphorae infused with intention, lined with beeswax, sealed with linen soaked in oil, stamped with symbols that might read, "Good brew," or "Do not drink temple offering." It's hard to tell. Ancient Egyptian script leaves room for interpretation, especially after a pint. You and a few others begin the delicate pour. It's like handling newborn crocodiles, wet, slippery, and liable to cause a scene if mishandled. But you manage, sort of. One jar burps loudly, the foam spilling over like a child with a full mouth of honey cake. You mop it up, then step back to admire the array 20 amphorae, gently fizzing, sun-warmed, full of potential. In a few days, they'll be ready for consumption, stronger than the breakfast blend, but not enough to knock out a hippo. Unless the hippo hasn't eaten. Then all bets are off. Now it's time for the curious part of the process, beer storage. You carry 2 amphorae down into a cool pit dug beside a mud brick wall, shaded by a canopy of woven reeds. This isn't just about temperature control, it's about respect. Beer is sacred here. You don't leave it lying around in the sun like a half-eaten melon. The walls of the storage room are etched with prayers to Tenenet, the goddess of childbirth and brewing. She's often shown cradling a jug of beer like it's her firstborn. You whisper a little thank you as you set down the jars. You're not sure if she's listening, but hey, better safe than spiritually flat. Historians still argue whether this reverence for beer was rooted more in religion or practicality. Was it about pleasing the gods, or just making sure your grain didn't rot in the heat? Probably both. That's the magic of ancient Egypt spirituality and spreadsheets all in one. Back above ground, lunch is served. And by lunch, we mean more beer, alongside a hearty helping of onions, lentils, and a surprisingly spicy chickpea mash that you're pretty sure wasn't supposed to be that spicy. Someone giggles as you reach for your mug. Your face must have betrayed you. You wash it down with a long sip of lukewarm golden joy. There's a comforting sameness to it, by now fizzy bready, a little grassy, like someone carbonated your grandma's sourdough starter. As you eat, a few elders start telling stories, not epic tales of gods or pharaohs, but humble beer sagas, the time a rat fell into the fermentation vat, and they didn't notice until it was halfway gone. The day someone drank an entire amphora alone and thought they were being followed by a talking ibis. You laugh until your sides ache. Because beer in ancient Egypt isn't just a drink. It's a story starter, a truth serum, a memory eraser, a social glue that binds farmers, priests, potters, and even tax collectors together in one slightly tipsy tapestry. Across the courtyard, you notice a scribe crouched beside a wall, sketching something with a reed pen. Curious, you wander over. He's illustrating a sequence of brewing steps, kind of like an ancient IKEA manual, but with fewer Allen wrenches and more reverence. You lean in. There's you, or someone like you, pouring mash. There's a smiling woman sealing a jar. There's a little god figure hovering above it, all arms outstretched, like he's blessing the entire frothy mess. Temple commission. The scribe explains, not looking up. They want it on the side of the offering room. Of course they do. After all, no one wants to arrive in the afterlife without refreshments. Speaking of the afterlife, you remember something your neighbor said earlier, that in some tombs they've found tiny beer jugs placed beside statues of the dead, just in case the soul got thirsty on its journey. You imagine your own soul wandering through Duat, the Egyptian underworld, with a backpack of snacks and a little amphora slung over your shoulder. Just here for the ride, you'd say, sipping thoughtfully. Where do we queue for judgment? You smile. Death might be uncertain, but at least they've got drinks. As the shadows stretch across the courtyard, signaling the slow descent of the sun, another jug is opened. This one has a richer scent, more dates, deeper fermentation. Someone calls it dinner beer, and the phrase makes you snort softly. It's official now, your entire day has been mapped in barley-based beverages. You sip again. The flavor is deeper this time rounder, with a touch of smokiness that makes you raise an eyebrow. New batch, someone says proudly. We added honey last week. It's good. Really good. You feel it spread through you like warm light, like the Nile's embrace in flood season. You're relaxed, full, and possibly just a little too aware of how many amphorae are still bubbling nearby. But you don't stop. Not yet. Because in this sun-baked, goddess-blessed brewery tucked between the fields and the river, you found something surprisingly profound: community, connection, and a legacy that bubbles as steadily as your drink. Tomorrow it begins again. But for now you lean back, raise your mug to the sky, and thank the gods, especially the one who thought to ferment soggy bread, and call it a beverage. The sun is setting now, painting the walls of the brewery courtyard in stripes of bronze and tangerine. Shadows stretch long and lazy across the dirt floor, and even the beer jars seem to glow like little embers warming from within. You wipe your brow with the edge of your tunic, smearing a little flour and a lot of pride across your cheek. You've made it. Morning mash to evening pour, from barley to buzzed. Around you the mood shifts. The day's labors are done, and conversation becomes less about mash consistency and more about dreams, family gods, and gossip. One woman swears she saw a ibis nod in approval at her brewing technique. Another swears the ibis winked. You don't argue. You've had just enough to consider that maybe it did. Someone brings out a lyre. A few others clap along to a rhythmic tune about a brewer who fell in love with a fisherman, only to discover he'd stolen her best amphora. The crowd laughs, feet tapping on stone heads, bobbing gently like lotuses in the breeze. You sink onto a woven reed mat, legs crossed, mug in hand. The earth is still warm beneath you. There's something about beer at dusk, it hits different. Not stronger necessarily, just rounder, mellow, like the drink has absorbed the memory of the sun and wants to share it. You take another sip, and suddenly you're in the field again. You remember the beginning, the golden waves of barley whispering under an early morning sky, your bare feet dusted in chaff, the thrill of spotting a particularly plump grain ripe for harvest. That moment, quiet, reverent, full of possibility, is somehow preserved here in the mug. You're not the only one lost in nostalgia. The elder sitting nearby tells a story of brewing in his youth, back when jars were taller and yeast was harder to come by. He chuckles, his voice like sand slipping through fingers. Back then we prayed harder and drank slower, he says, though not necessarily in that order. You smile because beer has always been time travel. Each jar holds the story of a season, the rains that didn't come, the heat that scorched too early, the grain that survived despite it all. It's not just fermentation, it's memory made drinkable, and the gods. Oh, they're in it too. You glance at the small shrine nestled in the corner, half hidden behind a row of amphorae. It's dedicated to Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and drunkenness, a triple-threat patron if there ever was one. Her tiny statue is carved in soapstone a cow's head, with eyes too wise for stone ears listening to secrets only the beer dares whisper. There's a little saucer of fresh mash in front of her, still steaming. An offering? You add a splash from your mug because it feels right. Also, you're hoping she might help with tomorrow's fermentation. It's always good to stay on her good side. Historians still argue whether such offerings were symbolic gestures or legitimate religious transactions. Here's some mash now, please don't ruin the batch. But either way, people did it. And when enough people do a thing long enough, it becomes truth. Nearby, a boy is etching shapes into the dust with a stick. A sun, a stalk of barley, a fish. He pauses and adds a mug complete with bubbles. You watch quietly, heart full, as he turns simple lines into symbols. He doesn't know it yet, but he's writing history the same way you are, just without the yeast. A breeze picks up, ruffling the parchment, drying on the line. It's a list part, recipe part poem scribbled by a brewer's apprentice with dreams of publishing the first beer cookbook. You've heard him recite the introduction. For the gods, the people, and those with excellent taste. He's insufferable, but you like him. The stars are beginning to prick the sky now, one by one, like someone's lifting a veil on the heavens. You lie back on your mat and let the day settle. Your muscles ache, your brain hums, and your heart feels just a little fizzy. This is your version of meditation. No mantras, no incense. Just the sound of water lapping the Nile's edge, the earthy scent of brewing grain, and the faint buzz of beer softening the corners of the world. Across the courtyard, someone snores. Another mutters about a dream involving a hippo in a headdress. You chuckle, eyes half closed, drifting on the edge of sleep and barley. You think of the future, of what archaeologists will find thousands of years from now, your clay jars, your scribbled notes, the bones of your dinner half buried in sand. Will they understand the sacred science of what you did here? Will they grasp that you weren't just making beer, you were bottling life? Maybe, maybe not. But they'll know one thing for certain: the people here lived with joy. They gathered, worked, sang, and sipped. They praised their gods and honored their land. They turned the simplest thing, grain and water, into magic. And they laughed a lot. That's got to count for something. You raise your mug again, not to drink, but just to salute the stars. They wink back, ancient and amused. You whisper softly, "Tomorrow we brew again." And then with a contented sigh, you close your eyes. The night deepens, but Egypt never truly sleeps, not entirely. Somewhere a crocodile yawns in the Nile. Somewhere a priest is charting stars on a temple ceiling. And somewhere right here, actually, you're dreaming of beer. Not metaphorical dreams either. You're actually dreaming about grain bubbles and amphorae with legs. One is chasing you, muttering something about over-fermentation, and you're not entirely sure if you should run or apologize. You blink awake, groggy but smiling. A cool breeze brushes over your face. The fire has dimmed to embers, but it's still warm enough to chase off the chill. Your satchel of samples lies beside you, secure. So does your mug, though it's mysteriously empty. Clarissa is curled up nearby under a shawl, her curls a mess of salt and sweat. She stirs and mutters something about lettuce. Classic Clarissa. You sit up slowly, bones creaking like a well-used kiln. It's a new day, or almost. The horizon is beginning to lighten just a little, turning from black to deep blue. Time it seems to get moving again. And what do you do, barely awake and still tasting last night's barley? You head back to the brewery. Because here's the thing about beer in ancient Egypt: it wasn't just a morning beverage, it was the morning. It greeted the sun, broke the fast, soothed the belly, and gave you a reason to keep going when the linen factory called your name or the market stalls needed your shout. You arrive before most slipping in through the side gate. The air smells different now, less yeasty, more earthy. The mash from yesterday is still warm, slumbering in its vats, waiting for the final strain and stir. You begin by checking on your jar the small one set aside from the main batch. It's a little personal experiment barley steeped with coriander and wild mint. You uncork it and sniff. It smells like ambition. And possibly soup. You're not discouraged. Every good brewer plays. That's how Beer with Dates was born. Or that odd phase when someone insisted on adding garlic. That one didn't catch on. Historians still argue whether ancient brewers followed strict recipes or improvised based on local ingredients and mood. But honestly, you've seen enough experimental jars buried behind benches to guess the truth. Rules were more like suggestions. And suggestions were more like wild guesses with a prayer to Hathor attached. You kneel beside the main vat and give it a stir. The surface ripples, revealing a beautiful crust of fermenting foam. You nod. It's alive. Not just bubbling, but breathing, expanding, thinking. Yes, beer can think. Or at least it feels that way when you've stared at a vat for too long on too little sleep. You hum a tune as you work something half-remembered from childhood, a lullaby about a frog who brewed ale in a golden bowl. Your hands move on instinct, now measuring by feel, scooping with practiced grace, always listening to the gurgles and gassy sighs of your microbial masterpiece. Outside, the world stirs. Roosters crow. Market women shout greetings. A child somewhere drops a clay bowl, followed by the sharp reprimand of a mother who loves him too much to let it slide. You don't leave the brewery, not yet. There's still the matter of straining. You grab a linen cloth, fine weave, soft from use, and position it over a shallow clay basin. Slowly, carefully, you ladle the mash into it, letting gravity and patience do the work. The liquid that pools below is golden. Cloudy, yes, but vibrant, almost glowing in the morning light. It's thick with promise. You dip a finger in and taste. Smooth, sweet, slightly nutty. The gods would be pleased. You pour the first serving into a wide-handled mug, just as the workers begin to trickle in. They nod to you, some offering sleepy smiles, others rubbing their eyes. One woman asks if today's batch is better than the last one that foamed like a volcano. You assure her it is. Probably. You serve. One by one they take their mugs and sip, pausing just long enough to savor the first swallow before diving into the day's tasks. And as the courtyard fills with the clink of pottery, the clatter of sandals, and the warm murmur of early chatter, you realize something lovely. You are part of their morning, not just a brewer, a mood setter, a quiet architect of ease. The beer you made sticky, time-consuming, absurdly messy, is now coating their throats, waking up their spirits, giving shape to another long day under the Egyptian sun. And when you see Clarissa wander in, rubbing her eyes, and muttering something about lettuce dreams, you already have her mug poured and waiting. She raises it in salute. To seaweed and yeast, you raise yours. To waking up full of barley and regret, you clink and the mugs ring with a gentle sound. This is the sacred part of beer, the part historians sometimes forget to mention. Not the brewing, not the pouring, not the rituals or the gods, but this the shared moment of warmth breath and barely concealed snorts of laughter between people who barely slept, but still show up. You take another sip and let the morning settle around you like a second skin. You'll brew again tomorrow. But today is for drinking the past. Your stomach growls loudly. So much for grace and mystery. Clarissa hears it too and snickers. Sounds like Ra's chariot just crashed into your belly. She hands you a chunk of date bread from her satchel. You nibble it, slowly pairing each bite with sips of your own morning brew. Sweet meets sour, soft bread meets effervescent grain, and suddenly you're not just full, you're content. This, as it turns out, was breakfast for most ancient Egyptians. Beer wasn't just a side dish or indulgence. It was the breakfast. It was caloric hydrating, mildly intoxicating, and full of vitamin B, even if no one knew what vitamin B was. And with bread as the other half of the meal, you had yourself the sacred duo, the daily nourishment that built pyramids and fueled revolutions. Historians still argue whether this pairing was out of necessity or genuine preference, but considering how often it shows up in tomb paintings, temple offerings, and what to pack for the afterlife lists, it's safe to say people took their breakfast beer seriously. You glance around. The courtyard is humming now. Workers sip slowly, leaning on pillars. Someone sings softly under their breath, maybe to the goddess Tefnut. A cat slinks through the crowd, pausing only to inspect a bowl of discarded grains with imperious disdain. Clarissa joins a group arranging amphorae. Each one is painted with symbols that hint at content and strength. Frothy lines, barley stalks, tiny depictions of Isis holding a foaming mug, somewhat anachronistic, but very fashionable this year. You return to your notebook, scratching notes with a sharpened reed. You record the weather-warm, dry breeze, ideal for open-air fermentation. You note that the yeast seems livelier today, likely due to yesterday's warmer mash soak. And you scribble in all caps, Clarissa dreamed of lettuce. You're not a scientist by official decree, but by obsession. Yes, and here that's enough. A priest arrives dressed in saffron and deep indigo. His sandals are dusted with river sand. He greets the brewers' team with a solemn nod and approaches the offering table with a long scroll in hand. He recites something about divine harvests and the golden breath of Hathor. Then, with a grand flourish, he places a clay mug filled to the brim before the small statue of the goddess. Beer, after all, wasn't just breakfast. It was divine currency. The gods didn't want gold. They wanted grain molded and fermented proof of human gratitude and competence. The very act of brewing was sacred. Your early morning fogginess, an echo of ritual. Your burp, a low hymn. Your satchel full of barley paste. Technically, holy. A child runs by and bumps your elbow. You spill a few drops onto your scroll. You sigh, then laugh. Then decide the stain looks vaguely like a frog. You add eyes and legs with your reed and label it Hoppy Accident. Meanwhile, the priest lifts the mug again and drinks. He smacks his lips, nods, and says something about balance. A second priest scribbles something into a wax tablet and frowns. The evaluation of today's brew has officially begun. You watch nervously. This batch was yours. Clarissa inches closer, whispering, I saw the high priest spit out last week's batch. Please tell me this one won't do that. You gulp. It better not. I included coriander. That's either brilliant or grounds for exile. Exactly. The priest finishes. He places the mug back on the altar and gives a subtle nod. No spitting, no snorting. Not even a single sarcastic eyebrow raise. You exhale. You might survive this. Suddenly, a woman nearby raises a toast, her mug lifted high against the late morning light. To beer for breakfast for the gods and for the dreams of lettuce. The courtyard erupts in laughter. You bow dramatically and raise your own mug. To being full before noon and smarter than we look. Toasts like these weren't unusual. Beer brought people together, gave them something to agree on, and softened the edges of long, sun-drenched days. At harvest festivals, beer ran like rivers. At funerals, it soothed grief. At temple processions, it was splashed at statues to invoke divine blessings, or at least mild divine tipsiness. Historians still argue whether ancient beer had consistent alcohol content or whether it varied wildly depending on the brewer's mood and the weather. Based on personal experience, you'd say, yes, both. Definitely both. You walk the perimeter of the courtyard, now observing the groups. Farmers discuss barley yields. Bakers inquire about leftover mash to repurpose into dough. One man is asleep on a bench with a dried date stuck to his forehead. Clarissa joins you. She's been sketching amphora shapes and debating labels. Do you think a frog holding a mug is too much? You shake your head. It's not enough. She grins and jots something down. Lunch is still hours away. The sun is climbing, but the beer is keeping everyone just soft around the edges. Not drunk, never that. Just foggy enough to smile more than usual, patient enough to endure midday heat, full enough to forget their sandals squeak. This is what Egyptian mornings looked like. Not hustle, not toast with jam or drive-through espresso, but beer in clay mugs, laughter in shade, and the slow satisfaction of ancient rituals repeated with barley and love. And you're proud of this batch. It's cloudy, it's spicy, it's completely unrepeatable because you forgot to measure most things. But it's good. And it's yours. And maybe when they're painting tomorrow's murals, someone will add a little frog holding a mug in the corner. Just for you. You wake up in a puddle of shade. Technically, you weren't asleep, just meditating with your eyes closed and your mouth slightly open. That's what you'll say if anyone asks. Your half-finished mug of breakfast beer is now lukewarm, but you drink it anyway. It tastes faintly of clay and triumph. Somewhere behind you, Clarissa is arguing with a temple scribe about the proper way to spell zitham in hieroglyphs. The scribe insists on a reed followed by a sun disk. Clarissa is doodling a hop cone with wings. This is your life now, and you're weirdly okay with it, because ancient Egypt didn't draw a line between sacred and silly. Not really. The same people who mummified bulls and aligned pyramids with stars also worshipped cats with eyeliner and told dirty jokes in limestone graffiti. Their breakfast beer came with prayers and burps, and that's kind of beautiful. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals, offerings, tastings, brewing ceremonies were truly religious in nature or just deeply ingrained habit. Was beer a holy gift to the gods, or just the most convenient excuse to avoid eating lentils at 6 a.m.? Hard to say. Probably both. You stretch your limbs creaking like a well-used amphora. Clarissa flops beside you, flinging herself onto the ground with the flair of a drunk gazelle. She's holding a palm leaf fan and a roll of papyrus covered in grain calculations. She fans herself. Do you think the gods ever get tired of offerings? You shake your head. No, but I think they'd appreciate variety. Next week, she announces we offer cheese. Brave. Revolutionary. She scribbles cheese offering in bold ink, underlined twice. The temple bells chime softly from beyond the courtyard. That means the midday sun has reached its highest point. You're expected to clear out soon. The courtyard will close for cleaning, and the priests will prepare for the afternoon prayer cycle, during which no mortals are allowed to sip crunch or cackle within the sacred walls. Clarissa mutters, "They're just jealous they didn't think of coriander first." You nod solemnly. Envy is unbecoming of divine beings. You pack up your gear, slowly rinsing your reed pen, recorking your brine jar, shaking sand out of your blotter cloth. The beer samples are tucked into wax-sealed flasks, labeled with numbers drawings, and one particularly bold entry labeled "Tastes like Victory." There's still one mug left. You hesitate, then decide to offer it to the gods. You set it down carefully at the base of a sandstone statue, an imposing figure with a lion's head and what looks suspiciously like a wink in its left eye. "Thanks for not smiting us," you say. A small breeze picks up. You pretend it's divine acknowledgement. Back outside the courtyard, the streets of the village bustle like a hive. Children chase goats. Merchants hawk bunches of garlic and polished beetles. A woman sings something tuneless but sweet while carrying a stack of linens on her head. You and Clarissa walk toward the edge of the settlement where the irrigation ditches glisten under the sunlight and frogs chirp like tipsy philosophers. You stop at a familiar bend in the canal. A flat stone juts over the water, your favorite brewing spot. It's where you first tried fermenting beer without supervision. You were 13. It exploded. Clarissa laughs when you mention it. I remember. You ran home covered in barley and shame, and you told everyone I'd invented a new fashion trend. I still think yeast corsage could have caught on. You sit on the stone and pull out a papyrus scroll, the one where you've been mapping brew times, notes, ratios, and flavor ideas. At the top, in florid ink, you've titled it, The Holy Book of Hops. Not historically accurate, but very emotionally accurate. Clarissa flops beside you and starts sketching potential labels. One is a picture of a cat smirking next to a mug. Another is a hieroglyph that, when loosely translated, means yummy stuff. You sigh with satisfaction. You're not a priest, not a noble, not even officially recognized by the Grain Guild, but you're a brewer, a chronicler of barley magic, a small-town Egyptologist of the soul. And if anyone asks what you do, you'll say I make beer for breakfast and sometimes for history. There's a rustle behind you. You turn and see a teenager, probably a new apprentice, clutching a basket of barley and looking a little lost. Are you the ones who made batch 19? He asks. Clarissa leans back and grins. We might be. He swallows nervously. They want to serve it at the governor's banquet. You blink. Clarissa gasps. The apprentice shifts awkwardly. So, do you have a recipe? You both look at each other. Slowly, deliberately. Then you burst out laughing. A recipe. That thing you never really used. Sure, kid. We'll write one down. You roll out the scroll again. Clarissa starts drawing barley grains with little halos. You list ingredients, sort of. You mention approximate timings. You add notes like, wait for smell to turn pleasant, and if it bubbles too fast, offer a prayer and back away slowly. And you end it with best consumed before sunrise. Pairs well with date bread and daydreams. The apprentice writes it all down. You watch him run back toward the temple scroll, flapping heart, probably racing. This is how legacies start, you think. Not with trumpets or gold seals, but with barley-stained fingers and silly names like Hoppy Accident. Clarissa nudges you. We did good. You smile? We did ancient. The sun begins to dip toward the horizon, painting the sand in long amber shadows. You stretch your legs, the breeze tugging at your tunic and sending little eddies of barley dust into the warm air. The fields surrounding you shimmer in the fading light, neat rows of emmer wheat and hulled barley swaying like they're whispering secrets to the Nile. You're not done yet. Because no true ancient Egyptian brewer simply walked away after a good batch. No, you test, you tinker, you improve, you adjust grain ratios, brewing vessels, fermentation times, always chasing that perfect sip. Not because anyone asked you to, but because somewhere deep inside you know that perfection might exist even in a mug that tastes like soggy dates and coriander dreams. You reach the edge of the barley field, where a small shrine to Osiris leans against a fig tree. Someone's left an offering, half a pomegranate, a string of shells, and blessed be a tiny jug of beer. You lift it gently, swirl it once, and inhale. It smells promising. You and Clarissa sit cross-legged in the field, backlit by the setting sun. There's no fanfare, no audience, no divine lightning bolts. Just two women sharing a mug of beer brewed by someone else, as a quiet gesture of thanks to the gods and each other. It's not the best you've ever had. But it's not bad either. You clink clay cups together. To Osiris. Clarissa snorts. To Osiris and mildly successful fermentation. You drink. Historians still argue whether these private acts of brewing and offering were meant to honor the gods past the time or simply taste better than muddy canal water. But sitting here with the day cooling around you and the buzz of frogs rising from the ditches, you start to think the real reason was something more personal. A way of taking chaos, wild yeast, broken grain, unexpected storms, and transforming it into calm. Something warm, something fizzy and alive and made by your own hands. Clarissa digs into her satchel and pulls out a reed pen, a wax tablet, and an idea. What if we start a brewers' club? You raise an eyebrow. A secret society of breakfast beer, rebels. Yes, with robes. And a catchy motto. You nod. Let's call it the Order of the Wobbly Ankh. Clarissa pauses. Too silly, perfectly silly. You spend the next 20 minutes brainstorming rules. All meetings must be held before noon. No arguments allowed unless mildly tipsy. First one to spill their brew recites a poem. Bonus points if it's dirty and rhymes. Rule number 4. Thou shalt not mock the foam. You both laugh so hard you nearly drop your mugs. Nearby, a flock of ibis birds lifts into the sky in unison, like the world's most elegant reaction shot. The last of the sunlight filters through papyrus reeds as the Nile glistens in the distance, calm as an oil lamp. You fall quiet. Just for a moment. Because this is what it's really about, not the yeast or the status, not even the history books. It's about friendship, about rituals, about taking something humble and transforming it into something shared. You run your fingers along the rim of your mug and think of your ancestors. Of the women who stood in the same fields barefoot in clay, lifting jars of golden brew toward the rising sun, asking nothing but peace and a good harvest. Of the ones who never had scrolls written about them, but who quietly poured offerings beside flickering lamps and whispered prayers the gods surely heard. You imagine them sitting beside you now, nodding in approval or giggling at the name Wobbly Ankh. You imagine them reminding you that legacy isn't always about monuments or tombs, it's about moments like this. Clarissa stands up, brushing barley husks from her robe. Let's walk, she says. You follow your feet, crunching gently against the soil. The stars begin to twinkle overhead first, 1, then 5, then too many to count. The sky here never apologizes for its beauty. It just opens wide and lets you stare. As you head toward home, you pass another shrine. This one has a weathered carving of Hathor, the goddess of joy, women music, and surprise beer. You stop and bow slightly, raising your mug in a casual toast. She doesn't answer, but the wind does. A cool breeze brushes past your cheek, carrying with it the scent of brewing grain and river lilies. You smile. I'll take that as a yes. Clarissa hums a song under her breath. Something old, something passed down, probably invented by a tipsy baker trying to remember all 7 ingredients to a sacred bread recipe. You join in. And together your voices drift over the fields, over the temples, over the tide of time itself. This is your world now. Damp, sun-drenched, a little bit fermented. You wouldn't trade it for anything. By the time you reach your village, the stars have fully bloomed across the sky, scattered like barley seeds on a velvet cloth. The walk back is slow, not just because your feet are sore, but because there's no rush. Not now. Not when the air smells faintly of roasted chickpeas and river silt, and the frogs have formed a choir that would put any temple singer to shame. You and Clarissa part ways at the edge of the courtyard, her basket of algae-colored bottles swaying gently at her side, your notebook slightly damp from an earlier slosh, but still proudly intact. There's a brief pause. The kind that says we'll do this again. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. After all the yeast waits for no one? Inside your house, things are still. A single oil lamp flickers on a clay shelf, casting sleepy shadows across the wall. The grinding stone rests in the corner, half buried under a linen cloth. Nearby your fermentation jars sit like little squat soldiers in their reed baskets, burping quietly beneath their seals. You smile. They're alive. You remove your sandals and stretch your back with a sound that echoes faintly in the empty room. Then, almost by instinct, you head to the journal. It's modest, just a few sheets of parchment tied together with a bit of twine corners curled from use. But it's yours. You unroll a fresh piece and begin writing in long, looping script. Brew batch, or 22 evening tasting report. Slightly bitter start, smooth finish. Added extra fig paste, unclear impact. Clarissa still claims hers has more bubbles. Possible rivalry brewing, high. You pause. Consider sketching the spiral shape of the foam from earlier. Instead, you draw a small frog with a beer jug on its back. Close enough. Historians still argue whether these journals, often written on scraps and never formally archived, were truly scientific records, or just whimsical domestic logs. But here's what they miss. These were acts of quiet rebellion. Women documenting knowledge even if nobody asked them to, even if nobody would ever read it. You lean back on your elbows and glance around the room. Everything smells faintly of yeast and wood smoke and sun-dried dates. You like it that way. It reminds you of process, of patience, of getting things gloriously experimentally wrong and still being proud of the result. You walk over to your drying rack and lift the muslin cloth from one of the finished loaves. It's round a little cracked at the top, golden brown and still warm. The yeast worked. The balance was right. And that tickle in your throat earlier. That's the flavor of tiny victories. You tear off a piece and munch in contemplative silence, crumbs dusting your tunic. You think again of Hathor smiling that sly, eternal smile, and wonder if she's ever truly stopped watching. Maybe every giggle at a spilled batch or wink over a shared mug is just her way of saying, yes, you're doing fine. And you are. You're not building pyramids. You're not embalming kings. You're doing something much quieter, much softer. You're making small joy from ordinary things. Grains, water, time, intuition, laughter. You rinse your hands in a ceramic basin, pat them dry with a linen scrap, and extinguish the oil lamp. The room dims into velvet silence. The stars, still whispering outside, keep your secret that you, a woman with a stubborn streak and a strong, stirring arm, have built something lasting. Not just beer, a ritual, a rhythm, a record of self. And long after the Nile has shifted its course again, long after the last tomb has been sealed and forgotten, maybe someone will unearth your notebook. Maybe they'll run their fingers across the drawings, squint at your haikus, and wonder who this frog brewer woman was. Let them wonder. Because you know. And tonight that's enough. So now the stars continue their slow, sleepy sweep across the heavens. The last flicker of lamplight fades from the clay walls, and outside the frogs are still crooning like lazy minstrels on the Nile's edge. You lie back now, limbs warm from the day's labor heart, full from the quiet victories no one else saw. Your hands still smell faintly of barley and brine. There's a soft ache in your muscles, the kind that speaks of usefulness, not exhaustion. You think of everything you gathered today, not just herbs or yeasts, not just sloshing jars or scribbled notes, but something softer. A sense of place, of purpose, of being part of something older than kings, more honest than monuments. And here, in this moment, there's no rush, no more tide to race, no hieroglyph to carve. Just the hush of linen as you shift under the covers, the steady thump of your heartbeat, syncing with the imagined thrum of brewing vessels in a moonlit room. Maybe you smile a little, thinking of Clarissa's smug grin or the strange foam bloom that looked like a tiny pyramid. You did well today, so breathe in slow and let the air taste like toasted grain and river mist. Let the weight of sleep press down gently like the lid on a jar of fermenting dreams. The past has done its part. The story's been told. The beer is brewed, the journal ink is dry, and the gods, whichever ones are listening, are probably raising a glass in your honor. Good night, brewer of breakfast and wanderer of weeds. May your dreams be frothy, your mornings light, and your heart always full.